It was a bright morning when Flight 427 prepared for its journey from New York to Los Angeles. The airport buzzed with the usual chaos. Passengers rushing to their gates, flight attendants moving with practiced precision, and the distant hum of airplanes taking off and landing. Among the crew was Claire, a young woman with a calm and composed demeanor. She walked through the gate with a clipboard in hand, checking her list as if she were performing a small daily ritual. To the passengers, she looked like any other flight attendant. Polite, friendly, and professional. They had no idea that behind her warm smile and soft voice lay a woman whose past was anything but ordinary. Claire had lived a life that most people would never even imagine. Before becoming a flight attendant, she had been a combat pilot in highly classified missions overseas. She had flown dangerous sorties, faced life-or-death situations, and earned multiple kill marks during her missions. Her courage and skills had been tested in ways few could understand. Yet, here she was, blending seamlessly into a civilian role, her extraordinary past hidden beneath a uniform and a calm exterior. As passengers started boarding, Claire greeted each one with a polite smile and gentle words. "Good morning. Welcome aboard Flight 427, she said repeatedly, her voice soothing and reassuring. Some passengers returned her smile. Others barely noticed her, lost in their own thoughts about the journey ahead. There were families, business people, and tourists, each carrying a mix of excitement, nervousness, and impatience. Nobody suspected that danger was silently waiting just a few rows ahead. The plane itself was a modern aircraft, gleaming under the morning sun. Its engines roared softly as it prepared for departure. Claire moved efficiently down the aisle, checking seatbelts, stowing luggage, and ensuring everyone was settled. Her eyes were sharp, taking in every detail, not just of her surroundings but also of the people on board. Years of military training had taught her to observe carefully, notice small changes, and anticipate possible threats. Even though she had switched careers, those instincts never left her. The passengers chatted quietly among themselves. Some read newspapers, some scrolled on their phones, and a few were already dozing off. Children fidgeted in their seats, excited for the adventure of flying. Claire offered smiles, small gestures of kindness, and occasional words of reassurance to anyone who looked uneasy. It all seemed ordinary, routine, and perfectly calm. But Claire was alert. She knew that even the most ordinary flights could take a sudden turn. Her military experience had taught her that danger often arrived without warning. The cockpit doors were closed and secured, and the pilots ran through their pre-flight checks. Claire moved back to the galley, making sure that the flight attendants were ready and the safety protocols were in place. She carried herself with the quiet confidence of someone used to high-pressure situations. Passengers didn't notice, but every step she took, every glance she gave, was calculated, precise, and aware. She had learned to remain calm under pressure, to observe without revealing fear, and to be ready for anything. As the plane began taxiing toward the runway, Claire took a deep breath. She felt a mix of anticipation and vigilance, the calm before a storm that nobody on board could foresee. The sun reflected off the wing, and the engines rumbled beneath her feet as the aircraft gained speed. Passengers murmured in excitement, oblivious to the fact that the ordinary flight they had boarded might soon turn into a life-or-death situation. Claire's mind, however, was already alert, scanning for potential problems, anticipating unexpected challenges, and preparing herself mentally for anything that might come. Throughout all this, she remained invisible to the passengers in terms of her true identity. They only saw the cheerful, attentive flight attendant making sure their journey was smooth. But inside, Claire's mind was active, processing every detail, recalling strategies, and mentally running through scenarios she had faced many times before, albeit in very different circumstances. She had learned the importance of patience, observation, and preparation. Even in the calmest moments, she never let her guard down completely. By the time the plane lifted off the runway and soared into the sky, the passengers were settling into the rhythm of a long flight. Drinks were being served, small conversations buzzed through the cabin, and the hum of the engines became a constant background sound. Claire moved gracefully through the aisle, offering assistance, answering questions, and maintaining a reassuring presence. To everyone on board, she was simply doing her job well. But beneath that calm exterior, the mind of a seasoned combat pilot was fully alert, aware that the ordinary flight could become anything but ordinary at a moment's notice. And so, as Flight 427 climbed higher into the clouds, the stage was quietly set. A plane full of unsuspecting passengers, a crew that seemed ordinary, and a single woman whose past had prepared her for situations that no one else could even imagine. The ordinary flight had begun, but Claire's presence ensured that even if danger struck, she would be ready, and nothing could catch her off guard. The flight had been smooth so far, with passengers beginning to relax as the plane cruised above the clouds. Drinks were served, conversations floated through the cabin, and the hum of the engines was comforting. Claire moved through the aisle with her usual calm, smiling at passengers, answering questions, and checking on anyone who seemed uneasy. Everything appeared ordinary, even peaceful. But high above the earth, the ordinary was about to shatter in a way that nobody on board could have imagined. Suddenly, a loud commotion erupted near the middle of the cabin. A group of men, faces partially hidden by scarves and sunglasses, stormed forward with an intensity that froze passengers in their seats. Their movements were aggressive, fast, and well-coordinated. They brandished weapons and shouted orders in a harsh, commanding tone. Panic erupted instantly. Passengers screamed, children cried, and people clutched the armrests, some praying, others frozen in shock. The hijackers moved with frightening efficiency. They forced passengers to remain seated, while they began demanding compliance from the flight attendants and pilots. The leader of the group, a tall man with cold, calculating eyes, barked instructions with authority. "This plane is under our control," he shouted. "Do exactly as we say, or there will be consequences." The air that had moments ago been filled with mundane chatter now became thick with fear and tension. Claire, standing near the front, felt a familiar surge of adrenaline. Her military instincts, long dormant in the routine of civilian life, flared to life. She quickly assessed the situation, observing the hijackers' positions, their body language, and their weapons. She noticed patterns in how they moved and communicated, identifying small weaknesses in their coordination. While passengers panicked, Claire's mind was already forming a plan, evaluating the risks, and calculating her next moves. Years of combat experience had taught her to stay calm in moments like this, to observe without revealing fear, and to be ready to act when the opportunity presented itself. Despite the terror around her, Claire's exterior remained calm and composed. To the passengers, she seemed the picture of poise, smiling faintly, speaking in gentle, reassuring tones. "Please stay calm," she said softly to the nearest passengers. "Everything will be okay if we follow instructions." Her words, though simple, had a grounding effect. People instinctively looked to her, drawn by her confidence, and felt a glimmer of hope amidst the chaos. The hijackers demanded that the pilots reroute the plane to an undisclosed location, threatening dire consequences if their orders were not followed. Claire quietly studied the cockpit door and the nearby aisle. She realized that while the hijackers were strong and armed, they were not infallible. Every action they took created tiny openings, brief moments of vulnerability. She mentally mapped out the cabin, noting the positions of passengers who might help, and identified points where she could intervene if necessary. The passengers were terrified, some whispering prayers, others whispering frantic reassurances to their children. Claire's presence was a silent anchor amid the storm. She moved through the aisle carefully, offering soft words, guiding people to remain seated, and subtly observing the hijackers. Her training taught her to make every action count, to remain invisible while preparing for decisive action. The hijackers, believing they had full control, were unaware of Claire's military background. They saw only a flight attendant in uniform, someone who appeared compliant and ordinary. This underestimation worked in Claire's favor. She noticed one of the hijackers becoming careless, leaving a small gap near the cockpit access panel. Another moved away from his post briefly to shout at a passenger. Each mistake was an opportunity, and Claire's mind cataloged them all, ready for the moment when action would be necessary. As the plane continued its high-altitude journey, tension in the cabin escalated. The passengers' fear was palpable, and the hijackers were growing frustrated with minor disruptions. Claire remained vigilant, her mind racing through strategies for both defense and control. She knew that any wrong move could endanger lives, so she balanced caution with readiness. Her calm exterior masked the storm of calculations inside her mind. In those moments, Claire's dual identity became critical. To everyone around her, she was a flight attendant, a figure of professionalism and reassurance. But internally, she was a soldier, a tactician, a fighter ready to act decisively. She recalled missions where a single split-second decision had meant the difference between life and death. Now, at 35,000 feet, surrounded by unarmed civilians and armed hijackers, the stakes were just as high. The cabin had turned from a place of routine travel into a pressure cooker of fear and tension. Every scream, every shout, every movement of the hijackers heightened the urgency. Yet Claire's presence remained steady. She was the calm in the storm, the observer who could see opportunities others could not. She understood that the next moments could define the outcome of the flight, and she was ready to act when the time came. As the plane continued toward an uncertain destination, the passengers were unaware that their lives were in the hands of someone far more capable than they realized. Claire, the quiet, unassuming flight attendant, had already begun planning her next moves. The hijackers had seized control of the flight, but they had no idea that the flight attendant in front of them was a combat pilot with kill marks. A woman whose skills and experience had prepared her for exactly this kind of high-stakes confrontation. The cabin was still trembling from the sudden hijacking, but Claire's mind was sharper than ever. While passengers sat frozen in fear, some sobbing, others whispering frantic prayers, she moved with the calm precision of someone who had faced danger countless times before. To them, she was the composed flight attendant, smiling gently and giving soft instructions to stay seated and remain calm. But inside, Claire was already assessing, planning, and preparing. Her past life as a combat pilot had taught her to spot weaknesses quickly, and now, in this confined metal tube soaring tens of thousands of feet above the ground, every detail mattered. She observed the hijackers carefully. Their movements were aggressive but not flawless. One of them occasionally glanced over his shoulder nervously. Another fidgeted with his weapon, showing impatience. They assumed they had complete control, but Claire's trained eyes caught even the smallest signs of hesitation or mistake. Every twitch, every glance, every half-step out of line was information she stored in her mind. To the hijackers, she seemed like any other flight attendant, a harmless presence, but that was the advantage she now held. They underestimated her completely. Claire's military experience had taught her to stay invisible until the right moment. She recalled her days flying combat missions, moments when split-second timing and observation meant the difference between life and death. The lessons from those missions were not forgotten. They now translated into the ability to act decisively under pressure. In the narrow aisle of the plane, she began to envision how she could move without alerting the hijackers, how she could create opportunities while keeping passengers safe, and how she could neutralize threats if necessary. Her first priority was the passengers. She quietly whispered instructions to a few sitting nearby, telling them to stay calm, follow her lead, and avoid sudden movements. The fear in their eyes was palpable, but her voice, steady and controlled, brought a small measure of comfort. She guided them subtly to stay out of the hijackers' direct line of sight while she mentally mapped the cabin for potential strategic advantages. Every seat, every overhead compartment, every emergency exit became part of her mental plan. While the hijackers barked orders and attempted to assert dominance, Claire began noticing patterns. They were aggressive, yes, but predictable in their aggression. One always positioned himself near the aisle, blocking movement. Another leaned on the back of a seat when giving instructions, momentarily distracted. Even their body language revealed tension. They were clearly nervous about the confined space and the potential for resistance. Claire analyzed everything. She saw possibilities for distraction, intervention, and control, all without creating panic among the passengers. Despite the fear gripping the cabin, she moved with grace and confidence. Every step was deliberate, measured. She pretended to adjust supplies and check passenger documents while actually scanning the hijackers and calculating the precise timing for any necessary action. Her calm exterior was a mask, a carefully maintained illusion that hid the storm of strategy and readiness inside her. She was invisible to the hijackers' calculations, a wild card they hadn't accounted for. At the same time, Claire used the moment to assess the passengers' capabilities. Some were strong, some agile, some simply too terrified to act. Quietly, she assigned mental roles, imagining who could help if needed. She realized that while most passengers could not physically challenge the hijackers, their awareness and subtle cooperation could be useful. A well-timed distraction or slight misdirection could create the perfect opening. Claire's mind worked like a chessboard, plotting multiple moves ahead while keeping everyone safe. Time seemed to slow for her. While the hijackers shouted, waved their weapons, and tried to instill fear, Claire's mind remained calm and clear. She visualized scenarios. One hijacker being distracted by a passenger, another overconfident and leaving a small gap, or a sudden movement to incapacitate one without alerting the others. She weighed each risk carefully, knowing that a single mistake could be catastrophic. Her past combat missions had drilled this mindset into her. Calm observation, careful calculation, and readiness to strike. Claire also understood the psychological game. The hijackers believed they had total control, but their overconfidence was their weakness. She subtly manipulated their attention, answering questions politely, smiling, moving efficiently yet innocently. Every gesture, every interaction was designed to keep them focused on the surface while she prepared for decisive action. It was not just physical control she was planning, it was mental. She was already undermining their confidence, even if they did not know it. By now, the passengers had begun to sense a subtle change. Claire's calm presence contrasted sharply with the chaos, giving them a flicker of hope. Some looked at her for guidance, trusting her in a moment when trust seemed impossible. Even in terror, they followed her soft instructions, holding onto her steadiness as if it were a lifeline. Meanwhile, Claire's mind continued to move at lightning speed, cataloging positions, memorizing gaps, and planning the perfect moment to act. In that moment, she became more than a flight attendant. She was a strategist, a protector, a silent warrior hiding in plain sight. The hijackers had seized the plane, but they had unknowingly brought a highly trained combat pilot into their midst. Someone whose skills, instincts, and experience had prepared her for exactly this type of high-stakes confrontation. The ordinary flight had already changed into something far more dangerous, yet Claire was ready. She had watched, learned, and prepared, and soon, she would turn the situation around, using every ounce of her training to protect the innocent lives around her. The plane continued through the sky, tension thick in the air, passengers terrified, and hijackers confident, completely unaware that the quiet, composed flight attendant moving among them was a force they could not possibly imagine. Claire's moment to act was approaching, and when it came, she would be ready, calm, and deadly precise. Claire knew that time was slipping away. The hijackers were gaining confidence, moving through the cabin with an air of control, barking orders, and keeping passengers on edge. Yet, beneath her calm exterior, Claire's mind was working faster than ever. She had spent years in combat situations where timing, observation, and precision were everything. Here, in the narrow aisles of Flight 427, those same instincts were her greatest weapons. Every movement, every glance, every whisper had to be calculated perfectly. One wrong step could put lives at risk. She started to move with a purpose that seemed ordinary to the passengers and the hijackers. At first glance, she was simply walking down the aisle, checking on passengers, offering reassurances, and performing her duties as a flight attendant. But every step she took was deliberate. She mentally mapped the positions of the hijackers, noting who was alert, who was tense, and who was slightly distracted. Her mind ran through countless scenarios, calculating which actions could create openings, which passengers could be guided without putting them in danger, and how to keep the hijackers unaware of her true capability. Claire realized that she could not act recklessly. The passengers were terrified, and many of them were frozen, paralyzed by fear. A sudden movement or loud shout could trigger panic or provoke the hijackers. So she spoke softly, moving close to those who needed reassurance. "Stay calm," she whispered to a young woman clutching her child. "Follow my lead. Everything will be okay." Her words, gentle and measured, had a grounding effect. The woman nodded, trusting Claire completely, and even a few other passengers began to regain a small sense of composure. It was subtle, but every bit of calm she could instill would help when action became necessary. As she passed by the hijackers, Claire studied their body language closely. One of them, the tallest, had a habit of constantly scanning the cabin but was slightly slow in reacting when distracted. Another, younger and nervous, fidgeted with his weapon, eyes darting between passengers. Claire catalogued every detail, storing it in her mind for the exact moment when she would need it. She was no longer just a flight attendant. She was a tactician, a strategist preparing for a confrontation that could change everything. She also began positioning herself strategically near the emergency equipment. If the situation escalated, she needed to have tools within reach. Fire extinguishers, oxygen masks, or even the safety belts themselves could be used to her advantage. Every aisle, every seat, every overhead compartment became part of her mental plan. She silently guided a few brave passengers, suggesting they sit a little lower, keep their hands visible, or shift slightly to avoid being in direct line of sight. These small adjustments were unnoticed by the hijackers, but they would matter when the moment came. Claire's thoughts were precise and controlled, just as they had been during her military missions. She mentally rehearsed the steps she would take if she needed to incapacitate a hijacker quickly. She considered angles, leverage, timing, and potential distractions. Every possible outcome was in her mind, every risk accounted for. She also prepared contingency plans, what to do if a passenger panicked, how to react if a hijacker moved unexpectedly, how to maintain calm even if something went wrong. Her military training had taught her that preparation was everything, and now that principle was saving lives. Even as Claire plotted, she also relied on psychology. She knew the hijackers were watching, listening, trying to assert control, but their confidence was fragile. She moved with purpose, with calm authority, subtly undermining their belief that they had complete control. Small gestures, smiling faintly, speaking softly to a passenger, glancing casually in a certain direction, created tiny disruptions in the hijackers' focus. Each small crack in their attention was an opportunity for her later actions. Time passed slowly but intensely. The passengers remained on edge, the hijackers grew more assertive, and Claire remained the calm, unassuming presence that hid a storm of calculation and readiness. She had already begun creating a mental map of opportunities. The distracted hijacker, the slight gap near the cockpit door, the passenger who could act as a minor distraction if guided correctly. Every scenario she imagined added a layer of control, a potential path toward neutralizing the threat without harm to the innocent. Claire's dual identity was critical in this moment. To everyone else, she was simply performing her job as a flight attendant, a professional maintaining calm in a terrifying situation. But internally, she was a soldier, a strategist, a protector. Her experience had taught her that observation was just as important as action, and patience was often more powerful than speed. She waited, watched, and guided, knowing that the first move had to be perfect. As the plane continued its journey high above the clouds, the tension remained thick. The hijackers thought they had control, but they had not yet realized that Claire was no ordinary crew member. Her training, discipline, and strategic thinking were preparing her for the moment when she would act decisively. The ordinary flight had already shifted into a life-or-death scenario, and Claire was ready to turn the tables, using every ounce of her skill to protect the passengers and neutralize the hijackers. In the confined metal tube, surrounded by fear and uncertainty, Claire became more than a flight attendant. She became the calm, calculating force that could change everything. Every breath, every step, every observation was part of a larger plan. She had turned chaos into opportunity, fear into strategy, and helplessness into preparation. The passengers, oblivious to her extraordinary abilities, would soon learn that the quiet, composed woman moving among them was a force that the hijackers could never have predicted. The opportunity came suddenly, almost by chance, but Claire was ready. One of the hijackers, a tall man with a cold expression, had stepped away from his usual position near the cockpit door, distracted by a passenger who had made a small movement. Another hijacker, younger and clearly nervous, fumbled with his weapon while shouting at passengers to remain seated. In that brief window, Claire saw her chance. Years of combat training had taught her that timing and precision were everything, and now it was time to act. She moved with quiet, deliberate steps, blending into the background of the cabin. To anyone watching, it seemed as though she was simply adjusting a passenger's blanket or checking on a drink. But in reality, she was positioning herself to strike. Her heart raced with controlled adrenaline, every muscle ready, every sense heightened. She knew she had only a few seconds to make her move before the hijackers could notice. Her mind ran through her plan once more, rehearsing each motion in an instant. Distraction, approach, incapacitation, and control. The first hijacker, unaware of her intentions, leaned forward to grab a passenger's bag. Claire took a deep breath and struck. With the precision of a trained soldier, she moved behind him, used his momentary distraction to her advantage, and delivered a swift, controlled strike to incapacitate him. He crumpled silently, the passengers too stunned to react immediately. The weapon slipped from his grasp, clattering quietly to the floor, unnoticed by the other hijackers for just a few crucial seconds. That small, controlled action marked the first step in reclaiming the plane. Claire did not hesitate. Every move had to be decisive. She grabbed the weapon and quickly scanned the cabin for the next immediate threat. Her eyes locked on the younger hijacker, who was now shouting louder, gesturing wildly, and drawing the attention of everyone around him. Claire used a combination of stealth and precision. She moved quickly, keeping herself low, using the aisle as cover, and advanced toward him with the confidence of someone who had faced life-or-death situations countless times before. As she approached, she spoke calmly, deceptively friendly, luring him into a false sense of security. "Please just stay calm," she said softly. Her words were a trap, designed to distract him just long enough. Then, with a swift and practiced motion, she disarmed him, twisting his wrist and using his own momentum to bring him to the floor. He struggled, but her training made every movement controlled and precise, ensuring no unnecessary harm while neutralizing the threat effectively. The passengers watched in awe, some unable to comprehend how the quiet flight attendant had suddenly turned into a force of power and control. Her eyes flicked to the remaining hijackers. One more remained close to the cockpit, growing suspicious but not yet realizing the full extent of what was happening. Claire knew she had to act strategically. She could not allow panic to spread among the passengers, nor could she give the remaining hijacker a chance to react violently. She guided a few passengers quietly towards safer positions, using soft, authoritative instructions, while maintaining her focus on the hijacker. Every movement was precise, every word measured, every action part of a carefully orchestrated plan. The hijacker nearest the cockpit tried to assert dominance, but Claire was ready. Using the element of surprise, she struck again, incapacitating him with a swift and controlled maneuver. He crumpled to the floor, shocked and defeated. The passengers stared, wide-eyed, as the realization hit them. The flight attendant they had trusted to calm them was not just an ordinary crew member. She was a trained combat pilot, someone who had survived real battlefields and had kill marks earned from dangerous missions overseas. The quiet woman in uniform had just taken down 2 armed hijackers with skill and precision that seemed almost impossible. Even in the chaos, Claire's mind remained calm and focused. She quickly moved to secure the weapons, ensuring that no hijacker could regain control. She also checked on the passengers, offering reassuring words, guiding them to remain calm, and subtly instructing them to stay seated or move only when safe. Her dual role, protector and strategist, was now fully revealed in her actions. She was a beacon of calm amid fear, a trained soldier ensuring the safety of every life on board. The passengers, who had moments ago been paralyzed with terror, began to sense that the tide had shifted. Confidence replaced panic in small measures, and they began to trust in Claire's authority. Her actions had not only neutralized the immediate threat but had also restored a measure of hope and control. Children clung to their parents, parents looked at her with gratitude, and even the more frightened passengers began to follow her silent instructions without question. By the time she moved back toward the center of the cabin, the first wave of hijackers had been neutralized. Claire remained vigilant, aware that the situation was not yet fully under control, but her strategic strike had bought precious time. She had turned the odds, at least temporarily, in her favor. The passengers were safe for now, and the hijackers were disoriented, no longer confident in their control. Claire had proven, in the most critical moment, that appearances could be deceiving, and that a calm, prepared mind was often more powerful than brute force. The plane was still airborne, but the momentum had changed. Claire, the flight attendant who had seemed ordinary just moments ago, had revealed her hidden skills in a way that no one could have predicted. She had taken the first crucial step in reclaiming the aircraft, ensuring that the passengers remained unharmed, and demonstrating the lethal efficiency of someone trained for situations far more dangerous than any commercial flight could ever seem. Her actions marked the turning point of Flight 427, a turning point where fear began to shift toward hope, and chaos started to meet control, thanks to a woman whose skills and courage surpassed everything anyone had expected. The cabin had changed completely. Moments ago, panic and fear had ruled the passengers, but now a sense of cautious hope began to spread. The hijackers who had been the immediate threat were neutralized, and Claire moved through the aisles like a shadow, calm and controlled, assessing the situation and planning her next steps. Every movement she made was precise, every glance purposeful. She was no longer simply a flight attendant. She was a protector, a strategist, and the passenger's lifeline. Her first priority was ensuring that the remaining hijackers could not regain control. She quietly secured the weapons they had carried, checking that nothing dangerous remained within their reach. The passengers were tense, still trembling from the sudden violence, but Claire's calm presence reassured them. "Stay low and remain calm," she whispered softly to a family huddled together. "We are safe for now. Just follow my instructions." Her voice, steady and confident, gave the passengers the courage to obey, to move cautiously without panicking. As she moved, Claire quickly assessed which passengers could help if needed. A tall man in the middle row had strong arms, and a young woman sitting near the aisle seemed alert and composed despite the chaos. While most were understandably terrified, a few had the strength and composure to be valuable allies in keeping the cabin secure. Claire mentally assigned roles. Some would stay seated but alert, others would be ready to assist in minor tasks, like blocking a hallway or helping restrain someone if necessary. She explained instructions subtly, almost imperceptibly, so the hijackers wouldn't notice. The remaining hijacker was close to the cockpit, now aware that something had gone wrong but unsure exactly what. He scanned the cabin nervously, his confidence shaken. Claire knew this moment was critical. She needed to maintain control of the situation and prevent him from creating panic. Her mind worked quickly, imagining how to approach him while keeping the passengers calm. Timing, precision, and psychological strategy were crucial. Every step had to be calculated. Claire also considered the passengers' psychology. Many were frozen, too scared to move, while others were on edge, ready to react in ways that could accidentally make the situation worse. She approached them gently, offering reassuring words and guidance. "Keep your hands visible," she whispered to one man who instinctively wanted to grab something. "Stay calm. Nothing can happen if we follow the plan." Her instructions were simple but effective, giving the passengers small tasks that helped them feel in control while also keeping them safe. While guiding the passengers, Claire subtly drew the hijacker's attention away from the cabin. She used small movements, soft words, and distractions to keep him uncertain and off balance. Every distraction was a tool. A passenger moved slightly as she instructed, and the hijacker's eyes followed the motion, just enough to create an opening. Claire observed his reactions carefully, noting his hesitation and the way his focus wavered. Her training had taught her that controlling the environment was as important as physical strength, and she was doing exactly that. Claire also positioned herself near the emergency equipment, ready for anything. Fire extinguishers, oxygen masks, seatbelts. Anything could become a tool if the situation escalated. She was aware of every exit, every aisle, every potential path the hijacker might take. Her mind was a map of possibilities, constantly updated as the situation evolved. At the same time, she maintained a calm, approachable demeanor so that passengers would follow her lead without fear. As the minutes passed, Claire coordinated with the passengers subtly. She guided a few to shift slightly so that lines of sight were controlled, preventing the hijacker from seeing too many people at once. She positioned herself strategically, ensuring that she could intervene quickly if needed, but without alarming the remaining hijacker. Her movements were like a dance, careful, calculated, and entirely focused on controlling the situation. The hijacker grew frustrated, realizing that his plan was unraveling. He shouted a few threats, waving his weapon, but Claire's calm, confident presence neutralized much of the fear he tried to instill. She met his gaze steadily, unafraid, which unsettled him further. Her composure showed him that he no longer had the power he thought he possessed. The passengers, seeing her confidence, began to feel a spark of hope. For the first time since the hijacking began, they sensed that they might actually survive without harm. Claire's tactical mind continued working, planning not just for the immediate moment but for what would happen once the plane landed or if the hijacker made a sudden move. Every detail mattered: the position of the cockpit, the placement of passengers, the distance of the hijacker from potential allies. She mentally rehearsed every possible outcome, ready to act with precision. Her experience in combat meant she could anticipate threats before they happened, and that skill now kept dozens of lives safe. By the time the plane was nearing its next stage of the journey, Claire had successfully coordinated the passengers, secured the cabin, and neutralized immediate threats. Her calm authority had turned panic into controlled vigilance. She had shown that even ordinary people could play a role in survival if guided correctly, and she had made the hijacker's position increasingly tenuous. The balance of power had shifted entirely. Claire's actions had done more than just protect the passengers. They had changed the atmosphere of the plane. Fear was still present, but it was tempered by trust in her leadership. Every eye followed her. Every mind relied on her judgment. She was no longer just a flight attendant or even a combat pilot in disguise. She had become the central force keeping the plane under control, ready for whatever came next. And she knew that the most critical moments were still ahead. The remaining hijacker had not yet been neutralized, and the passenger's safety depended entirely on Claire's next moves. She remained calm, focused, and ready, knowing that her strategy, patience, and skill would determine the outcome of this high-stakes flight. The final hijacker was all that remained. His eyes darted nervously around the cabin, realizing that the plan he had counted on had fallen apart. The other hijackers were incapacitated, their weapons secured, and the passengers were quietly watching, frozen in fear yet holding onto a fragile hope. Claire had observed him for minutes, noting every twitch, every hesitation, every sign of nervousness. She knew that this confrontation would be the most critical of all. The safety of everyone on the plane depended on her precision and control. She moved closer, her steps silent but deliberate, blending seamlessly with the motion of the cabin. To any passenger, it seemed as though she was simply passing by, checking on someone's blanket or a seatbelt. But in her mind, she was already calculating angles, anticipating reactions, and planning the exact moves she would take to neutralize the final threat. Her military training had taught her that patience and timing were as important as strength and skill. A single misstep could have catastrophic consequences. The hijacker noticed her approach and immediately tried to assert control, waving his weapon in a threatening manner. His voice was sharp, demanding, and filled with frustration. "Stay back!" he shouted, trying to intimidate both Claire and the passengers. but he was unaware of the calm, deadly determination behind her eyes. Claire's presence was unnerving, not because of fear, but because she radiated confidence. He had underestimated her from the beginning, seeing only a flight attendant in uniform. Now he was about to realize how grave that mistake was. Claire stopped a few feet from him, maintaining a calm and composed posture. She spoke softly, deceptively gentle, her voice betraying none of the adrenaline surging through her body. "It's okay," she said, almost coaxing. "Nobody needs to get hurt. Just follow my instructions." Her words were a psychological tactic, designed to keep him from acting rashly, to lull him into a false sense of calm while she prepared to act. She had learned in her missions that often, controlling the mind was just as important as controlling the body. The hijacker hesitated, unsure whether to believe her or lash out. That moment of indecision was all Claire needed. She made her move. In a swift, precise motion, she advanced while keeping her center of gravity low and her movements calculated. Using a combination of martial arts techniques she had perfected in training, she disarmed him in seconds. Her movements were fluid, almost like a carefully choreographed dance. Twisting his wrist, redirecting his momentum, and bringing him to the floor before he could react. He struggled, but Claire's technique was flawless. She had practiced countless scenarios in training where one wrong move could cost a life, and she applied all of that experience here. Her strikes were controlled, designed to incapacitate without unnecessary harm. Within moments, the hijacker was restrained, unable to reach his weapon or regain control of the situation. The plane, which had been a scene of chaos and fear, suddenly became a controlled environment again, under her authority. The passengers stared in disbelief. The quiet, polite flight attendant they had trusted to guide them through a frightening ordeal was not just competent. She was extraordinary. Claire had neutralized all threats, one by one, with skill and courage that seemed almost superhuman. Mothers held their children close, passengers whispered in awe, and a few of the braver passengers even breathed sighs of relief. For them, she had become a hero, someone whose calm and bravery had saved dozens of lives. Even after restraining the hijacker, Claire did not relax. She quickly secured the remaining weapon, checked the cabin for anything that could be dangerous, and ensured that all passengers were still seated safely. Her eyes scanned every corner, every aisle, every possible hiding spot. Her training had instilled a habit of thoroughness. Never assume the threat is gone until every detail is accounted for. She guided passengers gently, offering instructions and reassurance. "We are safe now," she said softly. "Just remain seated until the authorities arrive." Her voice carried authority, and every passenger obeyed without hesitation. Meanwhile, the hijacker on the floor looked around, shocked and defeated. He realized that he had completely misjudged the situation, misjudged the crew, and underestimated the woman who had neutralized his entire operation. Claire stood calmly, unshaken, and made sure he was fully restrained, leaving no room for error. The tension in the cabin slowly began to dissipate as the passengers understood that the danger had passed. Claire's mind, however, remained alert. She knew that even after the immediate threat was neutralized, the situation could still escalate until the plane landed. She continued to observe the passengers, providing reassurance and monitoring for any signs of distress or panic. Her role as protector was not over. She remained the calm, steady presence that everyone needed. Her actions had saved lives, but she knew that vigilance until landing was essential. By the time the plane approached its destination for an emergency landing, the passengers were calmer. Fear had given way to gratitude and admiration for the woman who had taken control. The hijackers were restrained, the weapons secured, and the cabin under complete control. Claire had transformed the flight from a scene of terror to a controlled, safe environment. Her skill, courage, and strategic thinking had made the impossible seem effortless. In those final moments before the plane touched down, it was clear that Claire had not just performed her duties as a flight attendant. She had gone far beyond. She had become a guardian, a protector, and a hero, proving that training, courage, and quick thinking could overcome even the most dangerous situations. The passengers would never forget the calm, composed woman who had saved them from certain harm, and the hijacker would never forget the force he had underestimated so completely. The plane touched down safely on the tarmac, and a wave of relief washed over everyone on board. The engines slowed, the wheels screeched gently against the runway, and the passengers let out breath they hadn't realized they were holding. The ordinary flight that had started so calmly had turned into a terrifying ordeal. And now, thanks to Claire, it was finally over. Yet, even as the passengers began to regain their composure, the tension of what had just occurred lingered in the air. Claire remained alert, her eyes scanning the cabin, making sure every weapon was secured and every hijacker restrained. Her hands moved efficiently, double-checking the binds on the last hijacker, ensuring he could not reach anyone or anything. She gave clear, calm instructions to the passengers. Remain seated until the authorities arrive. Stay calm, and follow my directions. Her voice, steady and confident, reassured them even as their adrenaline still surged. Emergency responders were already rushing toward the plane. Law enforcement, armed and alert, surrounded the aircraft as the cabin doors opened. The passengers watched nervously as officers quickly assessed the situation, moving to secure the hijackers. Claire spoke to them quietly, explaining the layout of the cabin, the location of the restrained hijackers, and any potential hazards. Her instructions were precise, and the authorities quickly realized that the calm, organized way the passengers had remained safe was thanks to her guidance and leadership. As officers escorted the hijackers off the plane, whispers began to spread among the passengers. They were stunned, almost in disbelief, at what they had witnessed. Mothers held children tightly. Businessmen who had been tense with fear now shook with relief, and every passenger looked at Claire with admiration. The quiet, composed flight attendant who had reassured them, guided them, and saved them had just performed acts that seemed impossible in such a confined, high-stakes situation. A few passengers approached her cautiously, wanting to thank her but almost afraid to disturb her focus. You saved us," one said, voice trembling. "I can't believe how brave you were." Claire smiled softly, the kind of smile that carried both humility and quiet strength. "I just did what I had to do," she said simply. "I'm glad everyone is safe." Her words were modest, but everyone could see that her bravery had gone far beyond ordinary duty. As the news of the incident began to spread, reporters and cameras quickly arrived. Claire's story was extraordinary, and soon the world wanted to know who this woman was. They had seen only a flight attendant, calm, composed, and professional, but the reality was far more impressive. Claire had been a combat pilot in highly dangerous missions overseas. She had trained for life-or-death scenarios and had earned multiple kill marks in classified operations. Her past, which she had kept hidden while working in civilian life, had now become the key to saving dozens of lives on Flight 427. Authorities, after interviewing Claire and the passengers, confirmed the extraordinary truth. The flight attendants and crew were praised, but it was clear that Claire had gone above and beyond. Not only had she neutralized the hijackers with precision and skill, but she had also maintained the calm and safety of the passengers. Her ability to combine strategy, courage, and quick action in such a high-pressure environment was unmatched. She had become a hero not just in the eyes of those on board, but in the eyes of the world. The passengers shared stories of the moments when Claire had quietly guided them, distracted the hijackers, and taken swift, decisive action. Some described watching her move with such confidence and calm that it almost seemed as though time had slowed. Others recounted how they had felt protected, even in the most terrifying moments, simply by her presence. Her ability to turn a life-threatening situation into a controlled, survivable scenario left everyone in awe. Even after the chaos had passed, Claire remained vigilant. She ensured the passengers were safely off the plane, helping children, the elderly, and anyone who seemed shaken. Her humility never wavered, despite the recognition she was about to receive. To her, the mission had always been simple: protect the innocent and neutralize the threat. The accolades and headlines were secondary. What mattered most was that everyone had survived. Later, when the news reports began airing, the world learned about the dual life Claire had lived. To the passengers, she had been their calm, capable flight attendant. To the military world, she was a skilled combat pilot, someone with experience and training that few could match. Her story was one of courage, precision, and unwavering composure. People were amazed that a single person, quiet and seemingly ordinary, could turn the tide against armed hijackers in such a confined and high-pressure environment. In the end, Flight 427 was remembered not for the terror of the hijacking, but for the extraordinary heroism of Claire. The passengers, authorities, and the public marveled at her skill, bravery, and the way she had maintained control when everything seemed lost. Her actions had saved lives, prevented potential tragedy, and reminded everyone that courage can come from the most unexpected places. Claire's story became a legend, a real-life account of bravery, calm under pressure, and the extraordinary power of one person determined to protect others against all odds.